रेडियो उड़ान की सभी अपडेट्स लेने के लिए इस चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कीजिए, इस वीडियो को ज्यादा से ज्यादा लाइक, शेयर और कमेंट कीजिए। एंड फॉर मोर इन्फो लॉग ऑन टू www.radioudaan.com।
इस कार्यक्रम में भाग लेने वाले प्रतिभागियों के द्वारा दी जाने वाली जानकारी अथवा की जाने वाली चर्चा वास्तविक और काल्पनिक दोनों ही हो सकती हैं। चर्चा के दौरान किसी व्यक्ति के द्वारा दिए गए कथन एवं तथ्य के लिए कार्यक्रम के प्रस्तोता, प्रस्तुतकर्ता अथवा रेडियो स्टेशन प्रत्यक्ष या अप्रत्यक्ष रूप से जिम्मेवार नहीं है।
जी दोस्तों, नमस्कार, आदाब, सत श्री अकाल। मैं दानिश महाजन एक बार फिर से आपका स्वागत करता हूं। आज प्रोग्राम एक मुलाकात में हमारे साथ बहुत ही खास पर्सनैलिटी हैं। आज हम इनसे बात करेंगे और एक कंपैरेटिव स्टडी करेंगे दो कंट्रीज़ के बीच में। आज की जो हमारी पर्सनैलिटी हैं ये एक लंबे अरसे से डिसेबिलिटी सेक्टर से जुड़ी हुई हैं। ये खुद भी डिसेबल्ड हैं और डिसेबिलिटी फील्ड में काफ़ी अरसे से काम कर रही हैं। इन्होंने कोई ऐसा एरिया शायद ही छोड़ा है जिसमें नहीं काम किया है, चाहे वो बात एक्सेसिबल वोटिंग की हो, चाहे ट्रेनिंग्स ऑन एटीट्यूड की हो, चाहे कंसल्टेंसी की हो, चाहे वो डेजी फॉर्म की हो, और या फिर बात हो ऑडियो डिस्क्राइब की। ये देशों और विदेशों में काम कर रही हैं। और आज की जो हमारी पर्सनैलिटी है वो बेसिकली साउथ अफ्रीका से हैं। हमारे साथ शकीला महाराज मैम हैं। मैम, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। वेलकम टू आवर शो। थैंक यू सो मच फॉर गिविंग अस टाइम।
Thank you very much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be part of your show and to talk to your listeners.
I was going through your profile and found it is very difficult for me to introduce you since you haven't left any area, that you are working in all the areas. So I would request you to kindly tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so first to explain that my disability is that I'm blind, totally blind, and I live in Durban, South Africa, based there, and I am also a mother and wife. So I am an organizational psychologist by profession. I graduated in that many years back and then got into the corporate world, where I worked in the field of human resources, largely psychometric testing and other aspects of human resource training, performance management, and so forth. And then when I felt when I developed sufficient confidence to face the workplace on my own, I decided to leave and start a consulting business, which I call Disability Management Services. In that consultancy, we have carried out some cutting-edge projects in South Africa and outside of South Africa. We've worked in many areas. So in the more recent years, I've become more associated with policy and strategy development. And now I actually feel I'm retiring from that consultancy. I've cut back and I've moved more into the areas like Dazy, South Africa, which I started way back. And I also started more recently in 2012, Audio Describe International. So I've been giving more attention to those areas and other projects that come along in between. So there's so much to share. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. And India has been a big part of my life and has influenced much of what I've done in South Africa.
Great. So let's start, ma'am. First of all, I would like to congratulate you the work you are carrying forward. It's really great. When I was reading, there is so much to learn from you, and hopefully people will learn a lot of things from this interview. I want to know, how did your journey start? What motivated you to start working for disabled?
Okay, so when I graduated and qualified as an industrial psychologist and started, my first job was in a railway company in South Africa. That's the government railways. It's a major organization, and it was a struggle to even get a job because a blind person carrying out a very visual job was not heard of, and I faced a lot of discrimination and prejudice. I literally walked the streets for 7 years looking for a job, and eventually I squatted. I don't know if that term is used in India. I sat outside the HR manager, the head of HR at the railways. I sat outside his door for 3 months until he just called me in and gave me an internship. When I did the internship, which was a 12-month internship, which was a requirement in order to become a registered practitioner, when I was doing that, then they realized my abilities. In that time, South Africa was not at all focused on employment of people with disabilities, and there were no laws to protect us or support us. So after the internship, when I concluded it, the company offered me a full-time position. And gradually, in that company, I rose up the ranks and eventually became head of a very large region and had many departments reporting to me. It was during that time that I became aware of the discrimination that disabled people experienced because of my own the barriers that I faced. But what was a very important part was people were becoming injured in the workplace and becoming disabled. For example, on the shunting yards in the railways, and the common practice in high-risk jobs when you become injured is that they remove you from the job. They call it medical boarding, and they, take you out of active employment, and you're then left out there in society to function on a small pension or something. So when I became aware of these practices, I started to oppose it and started to shift the mindset and get senior management and the executive team to look at how can we keep those employees, because they are already skilled in the field that they're in, and either we adjust the job situation to accommodate them, or we look at rehabilitating, retraining, and retaining. So at that time, those things were not being heard of. And so it was a struggle. But I eventually started gathering around me people who supported my thinking. And before I knew it, I had what you would call a disability forum going in those early years in South Africa. And then out of that, not long after that, the democratic elections took place. We had the new laws coming in, employment equity laws. We started having affirmative action come in, and then other laws that started to promote the rights of people with disabilities. So that's how my journey started. And when I left that company, they had proper policies, and by that stage, policies in place to promote the employment of people with disabilities. And they became a pioneer in industry in South Africa, because they were doing things long before the others. So when I started my consultancy, I expected to do more mainstream work, but on account of having worked with disability, I was immediately taken up by PricewaterhouseCoopers in South Africa to become their consultant on disability and service their clients. So that was a huge opening for me, to walk out of a full-time paying job straight into a consulting business of my own and already have a contract straight away with PricewaterhouseCoopers. So that launched me. And from there, I got exposure to all the big corporations in South Africa. And it gave me the opportunity to start putting in place policies, assessing their workplace. To be honest, I didn't have a lot of resources. And so I used to go back and forth to America, because I did graduate at Columbia University in New York. And so I had a close bond with the USA. So I went back and forth to look at what they were doing. My networks were very good there. And I sourced an excellent training course called Windmills. I actually trained many people here in India on that. It's primarily to change the mindset of employers. So that's how that started.
I will get back to you on the windmill training, Before that,
Yes.
I just want to understand. You've been there in India from long time. You come more often here. Your relationship with India is too old. So I just want to understand, how do you analyze the disability movement in India and disability movement in South Africa?
Okay, so over the years coming to India, I've been so impressed to see the speed at which things are developing, and I am aware of the challenges that are there, and they're not very different to what's in South Africa. But I'm also aware of all the good things that are happening. So the first major difference I see in India is that in a shorter space of time, you've achieved more and you'll have implemented more. South Africa went the route of developing very fancy laws. We've got all kinds of sophisticated laws, but the implementation of those laws has been very difficult to achieve. And we also have signed the UN Convention, and we have signed the additional protocol, but even the implementation of that is not equal to what's going on in India. So one of the big differences I see between India and South Africa, apart from many other differences, is that here the disabled sector just get on with it. You've got great leaders with disabilities in this country, across different disabilities, the blindness sector, the deafness, physical, cognitive. You've got great disabled leaders within those sectors. They themselves have challenged and brought about pioneering changes. So that's the one thing. Then I see in India, you'll have a very practical approach. You don't waste your time formulating a whole lot of policies and procedures. You'll identify what needs to happen and you'll get going with it. So, for example, in Mitra Jyoti, for example, Saksham in Delhi, they just get on with it, and you begin to change people's lives positively and influence. I see. So that's the other part. The other thing is the collaboration that I see here between the NGOs and the universities, the institutes, like, for example, IIT, the Institute of Indian Technology, where you've got this amazing concept, the Assist Tech Labs that have been set up. Here you've got graduates, PhD graduates, who have dedicated now their careers to just developing innovations for disabled persons. We don't have that at all in our country. Rarely would you find a graduate wanting to dedicate their lives to promoting the interests of persons with disabilities. You will find now more disabled persons researching the field of disability at university as they gradually are trickling into the universities and becoming professionals in that. But this Assist Tech Lab and that's just one example. I attended the conference Empowerment 2018, and I discovered there are so many private organizations, persons with disabilities, that have all going into research development, coming out with innovations, technologies. It's to me, this is a vibrant society, a society that's full of ideas, and they're implementing it. I can't say all of it is relevant, but nevertheless, most of it is creative, most of it will bring value. So that's a huge difference. We don't come, it even exceeds what's happening in America. It goes way beyond, because in America now they've come full circle. They may be even suffering from overdevelopment. So you don't see innovations coming out now. And much of the change makers in America are retired now. So the younger generation, they've come into a system where everything is already in place. Yeah. So in India, you got all the change makers.
That's a great compliment for the Indian leaders and those people who are working in a disability sector. They will be boosted about themselves after listening. You are commenting like that, or you're giving compliments to them. Now, if I want to know what has changed, it was a comparative study which you have put forward. Now I just want to understand what has changed in South Africa, the time you started your study, your schooling, and you started working, and you have done a lot in many sectors. So, according to you, what are the positive changes occurred in South Africa?
Well, there's been many significant positive changes. So the main changes that have come about has been our democracy, which came about in 1994, right? So given that, South Africa now, then you look at all the employment equity laws that came about. So for people with disabilities, we now have laws that protect our rights. We have laws. So it's turned us into a rights-based, human rights country. So the impact it's had is that it's made the disabled sector far more empowered to do things. And so they have the various NGOs have access to more resources than they would have ever had before, simply because they have a right to it now. And within government, you've got targets that have been set for the employment of people with disabilities. And even if they're not meeting the targets, there's an obligation now that they have to. Then you've got in the private sector, we have a system which India has also come out with, which is a scorecard system that evaluates and assesses corporates on the basis of their CSI. And in South Africa, they're also assessed on the basis of number of persons they employ and other categories. So how many disabled people they develop, how many they employ, how many businesses they support that are disabled owned, what representation exists at senior levels within the organization. So on paper, that looks excellent. But if we didn't have it, it would be worse. So the implementation of it hasn't been great, but nevertheless, it's there. So the disabled sector is a far more empowered sector in South Africa. All right? And
in India, our judiciary is very powerful. We get a lot of things from our judiciary. So if I want to understand from the South African perspective, if there is no implementation or if there are challenges with the implementation, do you go to court or do you seek remedies for implementation and stuff?
It's minimum, not to the extent that you would see in America, and I was not even aware of the extent to which it's happening in India. And I'm very glad to hear that your judiciary is strong, because in South Africa, what's the word I'm looking for? Violations of your rights, they can get away with it. So if your rights are violated, there's very little recourse. You can go to the judiciary. You would need finances to put your case forward. You would need, your own resources to fight your case. And whether you ever get the fairness in resolving it is another issue. So definitely that area needs a lot of development, where the judiciary will actually truly protect the rights of people with disabilities. And the other half of the coin is disabled people in South Africa are not yet of the mindset and culture where they will go and take it up in court and stand for their rights in court. So they will either object for a while and let it pass by. They're not
in
empowered
India,
enough
as
to do
I
that.
told you, as you talk about our leaders, so our leaders are very vibrant, and we are very thankful to the judiciary that whenever there is a violation, and the judiciary comes up and take suo motu action on. So that is a great thing in India. Anyways, so one thing which is very productive, and let us talk about that. About you were talking before about your windmill, about training on attitudes. So one problem is there in India after so much of development, or even if we are doing so much, we have got so much, and we have so many challenges still. But the attitude of the mainstream society is still not that satisfying what we are looking for. So what is the condition in South Africa, and what was your that windmill training all about?
Okay, so changing attitudes is the hardest thing to do, because ultimately you have to change a person's attitude towards themselves in order for their attitude to change towards others, right? So I had a very powerful instrument, which was my training program, and I ran that, and I found that there was measurable shift in attitude wherever I presented that training. But attitude on a wide scale takes time. And as you look back over the years, you can see those small steps led to long strides. So attitude is a long-term process. So in my case now, when I look at India, I can see a significant shift in how people with disabilities were treated years ago as compared to now. Maybe not all sectors in society have changed, but there's a growing acceptance culturally, socially, professionally. There is a growing acceptance of people with disabilities. But that doesn't mean to say the prejudices are not there, and those prejudices is an ongoing exercise of supporting non-disabled people to open their minds. I don't believe there's any easy solution to change attitude. It's not a quick fix. So it needs to be an integrated approach coming from every aspect in society. So culturally, people with disabilities should be mainstreamed within the health sector, within the transport sector, within education.
Yeah.
Every aspect. And as people with disabilities become more mainstream, as we see them more and more, then I mean, the perfect society, which whether we'll ever achieve, only when you become mainstream are you fully integrated. And even then, people never fully accept everything about everyone. So it is an ongoing human condition that we got to work with.
Yeah, share your experiences with us with regard to your training on attitude, what you call windmill.
Okay, so what I found is that when I would enter a company, my target market in the early years was industry and employers. So when I would get contracted to run the training, first to even get them to acknowledge that they need to do the training was a process, right? And then when I would run the training, to ensure that I had the right people attending the training. Ideally, you want everyone in a company to go through it, but they wouldn't always be open to that. So you need a core group of change agents that will take the learnings and begin to influence change wherever they were in the organization. So in that way, I worked, with that principle in mind. So it was a 3-day program. It still is a 3-day program. And it was a very powerful program to win the Windmills course, because it was made up of 11 modules that were games. Each module is a game. So you will bring the participants together and they would play a game. And in the process of playing the game, they would show up all their own prejudices, which they thought they didn't have. And then the facilitator of the training, which is myself with my own disability, you would take on their responses and you would show them bit by bit where the discrimination and prejudice lie, or just ignorance lay in their understanding. And you didn't leave it there. You then uninstalled that thinking and you reinstalled the correct thinking, so that their attitude shifts. And human behavior is such that the moment your mind opens to a new concept, you'll not go backwards. If you understand the new concept and you embrace it, then it becomes part of your integrated functioning. And that's the whole point with attitude. If attitudinal training happens correctly, at the end of that training, you've left the person in a different place.
Right.
So that's the kind of training I was running around. I was conducting in India.
Have you trained people in India?
Yes.
And where did you have these sessions?
So I had my first. The first one was coordinated by Saksham, at the University of Delhi, and I ran that training there, and I had a number of people from around the country. So I think that is also how, although Madhu and I from Mitra Jyoti met in South Africa, that's how we reconnected as well. I can't tell you all the individuals, but they came from all over the country, and many keep in touch. Yeah. So that, and then I ran it again, a second time, a third time in different places. I ran it, you wouldn't believe it, I ran it in Bhubaneswar as well, in Orissa, which was fascinating,
So, you ran these trainings. Now I just bring you back on dazy. As you mentioned in your talks that there is so much on paper in South Africa, but the advocacy is poor. There's very little from the judiciary. People can get away if they violate any rule, law, or there is not much for them to pay up. So I just want to understand that why did you start Audio Describe International and founded Dazy South Africa when you were already there in advocacy, and there is so much to do about advocacy? What fascinates you about Dazy and about Audio Described?
Well, okay. I think, first of all, I've also been going through a journey. So when I started out, it felt like I was working in an area that was just a void. There was nothing there, and there was a lot to do. And I had the privilege to have the foresight and the gift to have resources around me that I could work in the field of disability in the beginning. But over time, the disability organizations in South Africa have become stronger. And over time, more and more individuals have come into the field. Some purely for the commercial benefit of it, some who are part of the NGO sector, and some doing really good work. And so my offerings are no longer unique in that industry. There are many other consultants that can render the same service. And I've also trained individuals in South Africa to be windmill trainers. So in a way, that was one of the reasons I started to move away from it and to look for new stimulating interests. So I started to get more into projects. So on a project basis, I would get involved in specific things. I would put together a team, see the project through to completion, disband the team, and look out for the next project. So like that, I got into a variety of new things. So a small example would be when we had our national elections, there was a tender out to develop an accessible, what we called an accessible voting template for blind persons. So then I tried my hand at it. I worked with some engineers, developed a prototype, submitted, won the award. And that was a major contract. And since then, every national elections, that template is used. It's like a slate, and you slot in the ballot, and it slots into perfect spaces where you can then mark the ballot and make your choice. But it's not the perfect solution. That was the requirements and specifications I was given to develop a manual template. I later researched and discovered there are many more technological solutions and many more software out there that could do a far better job. But in saying that, I was really happy and privileged to have been able to make that contribution. So over the years, I've done a number of different things. So Audio Describe was just a natural progression. When I started in my travels, when I realized audio description had become a profession, a recognized art form, there's standards around it, I then went through the training myself and brought Joel Schneider, who is the renowned audio description trainer in the world, brought him to South Africa, ran training, and we received our first project, which was a television series in Zulu, a 13-part soapy, a 13-part series in Zulu. So I trained our first Zulu-speaking audio describers to do description. And my approach, which is, I believe, the approach that we should all adopt, and what is the case in the USA and the UK, is that we should never do description without a blind person involved from the beginning of the process and kept throughout. So I've made sure blind persons in South Africa are trained as describers and scripters, trained as what we call verifiers, and are there to assess and evaluate the final product as well. So it hasn't moved at the pace that we want, but what happens is I'm working, so I've been putting a lot of policies in place with regard to description. So I've supported the government's ICASA policy, which is the Independent Broadcasting Corporation. So we've got a minimum target now set for broadcasters to put description on all programming. It's a very small percentage, 2%, but it's better than nothing, and it's stimulating now an audio describe industry. So like that, on the one hand, I'm trying to implement, and on the other hand, I'm trying to be a catalyst and put in place policies. So I must tell you this one because I'm so proud of it. Just recently, for our movie industry and for our provincial film commission, the movie commission, we developed a groundbreaking document, which is a disability policy and strategy in the area of movie making. So, which now means that industry in South Africa are prescribed now by law to have to include persons with disabilities in the movie making industry across the whole value chain. So whether you're in camera, cosmetics, directing, producing, acting, script writing, whatever, people with disabilities must now be given the opportunity. And the other thing is to tell the stories of disabled persons, which India does so naturally and does so well. India is need convince our script writers in India. We didn't need laws here to convince producers and directors. They just recognized telling the stories of disabled persons is, in any case, a story worth telling, and there is already an audience out there ready to want to watch those movies. In South Africa, I'm hoping that these policies will stimulate interest and we can begin to tell our own stories, own movies about our own characters with disabilities as well. So we have a long to go, but we're getting there. I mean, regardless. So we're getting there. So I started just recently. It's a fun project, and I'm sharing it with my colleagues here in India. It's Audio Describe Movie Club, and I audio describe movies, and in a full cinema on the big screen. Yeah. And the reason I want blind persons to come along with their sighted companions and partners, not to just listen to it on a head, but experience it loud surround sound on the big screen with everyone else. And that's taken off really well. And then I'm using the same opportunity to sensitize government stakeholders and the industry. I invite directors and producers along to sit there and to experience a description. So, little things can begin to shift minds and can be achieved.
What about Dazy?
So what happened with Dazy South Africa was years ago, I became, and I still am, you see, when you're in the disability field, you automatically become aware of all the areas that are emerging. And at that time, Dazy was gaining a lot of ground globally, and I became very interested in what it was all about, and I learned a lot about the fact that people with print disabilities are not just blind people. And then it hit me that for the first time it was an education to me, and I got exposed to this whole thing. We had a very far-seeing, amazing leader, global leader in the Dazy consortium, Hiroshi Kawamura from Japan. So he came to South Africa and I met him at a conference, and we just had a lunchtime meeting. I didn't know him at all, and we just met during lunchtime, and I found him so impressive. And after that, he came to meet me in my home in Durban, and then he said to me, "I'm giving you a task. I want you to start Dazy South Africa. And he was like, to me, he felt like a guru, like a Swamiji. I'd just drop everything and follow him. He was this wise, far-seeing visionary. And with his support, then I started Dazy South Africa. And that's when I met Dipendra Manocha from Saksham, because he is the head of developing countries for Daisy. I met the whole team in Delhi, and then I started to come back and forth to India on account of my Daisy interests. So Daisy has come a long way. We've got many organizations that do Daisy production. The universities are producing their textbooks and exam materials in Daisy. It's been growing in South Africa. Now, of course, moving to EPUB 3, we've been training the publishers. That is an ongoing project. Even on this trip in India, I've been strategizing around the new initiatives for 2019. So it's ongoing.
तो दोस्तों, आप सुन रहे हैं प्रोग्राम एक मुलाकात, जिसमें आज हमारे साथ हैं मिस शकीला महाराज मैम, जो कि साउथ अफ्रीका से हैं, डिसेबिलिटी राइट एक्टिविस्ट हैं। आज चल रही है यहाँ पर इंडिया और साउथ अफ्रीका के बीच में एक कंपैरेटिव स्टडी, जिसमें हमने जाना कि इंडिया की एडवोकेसी साउथ अफ्रीका के मुकाबले बहुत अच्छी है। यहाँ की जुडिशरी डिसेबल पर्संस की ज्यादा सुनती है। एनीवेज, अभी इस इंटरव्यू में बहुत कुछ और बाकी है, तो आपको बने रहना है रेडियो उड़ान फ्लाइट ऑफ लाइफ के साथ। हम लौट कर आएंगे एक छोटे से ब्रेक के बाद। स्टे ट्यून्ड, कीप लिसनिंग।
नैब इंडिया यानी नेशनल एसोसिएशन फॉर द ब्लाइंड इंडिया की सबसे पुरानी संस्था है, जहां दृष्टिहीनों के लिए शिक्षा, रोजगार और पुनर्वसन की सेवा दी जाती है।
नैब इंडिया पर संपर्क करने के लिए हमें ईमेल करें hsg@nabindia.info पर। आप हमें कॉल भी कर सकते हैं। हमारा नंबर है 02266838637।
They say I am blind, but I could feel the intensity of Shah Jahan's love for Mumtaz at the Taj Mahal.
They say I am deaf, but I sensed the divine vibrations of the church bells in Kerala.
They say I cannot walk, but I climbed the mighty forts in Jaipur.
Enable travel powered by Cox & Kings. Accessible holidays for the disabled. No matter what your disability, we can do that holiday for you. Call 1-800-266-8002. Visit enabletravel.com.
Samarthanam Trust for the Disabled. Working by and for persons with disabilities. Empowered thousands of persons with disabilities since 1997. Creating new opportunities for employment, education and skill development through the training courses. Samarthanam Trust for the Disabled, backbone of Indian blind cricket team, loves nature and preserving it. Working in 6 states with more than 500 employees, making persons with disability financially and economically stable. For more info, log on to www.samarthanam.org, or you can send mail to support@samarthanam.org or info@samarthanam.org. Samarthanam Trust for the Disabled dreams and works towards providing an inclusive society to persons with disability.
प्रेम नाम है मेरा, प्रेम चोपड़ा।
प्रेम चोपड़ा नाम है जी मेरा। आप सुन रहे हैं रेडियो उड़ान, द फ्लाइट ऑफ लाइफ।
आज ही अपने मोबाइल फोन पर प्ले स्टोर या फिर ऐप स्टोर से डाउनलोड करें रेडियो उड़ान का ऑफिशियल ऐप और सब्सक्राइब करें रेडियो उड़ान का यूट्यूब चैनल। ज्यादा जानकारी के लिए लॉग ऑन करें www.radioudan.com। Happy listening.
I certainly believe disability, the synonym of disability is inaccessibility. If there is accessibility, there is no disability. So,
exactly.
What do you think? What is your take on how do you see accessibility? That whether it is a physical accessibility or a web accessibility, what is the condition of South Africa?
It's improving at a slow pace. So if we talk about environmental, say accessibility is the core. If you got accessibility, as you said, then you level the playing fields and everyone's operating at the same level, even though we operate differently, but we go about it with equal access, right?
Right.
So that's ideal, and that's what we want to get to. And in India, I feel attitudinally and in so many other ways technologically, it's really moving at a pace. Now, technology has definitely opened our world in South Africa, and it's smoothening it out. But the environment, we've still got a long way to go. There's a lot of laws in place as to how the environment should be designed, and minimum requirements with regard to environmental access. As new buildings come up, they have to comply, minimum standards. Older buildings may be more difficult to change. But today in South Africa, visibly, if you go around hotels, public buildings, you would see signs of accessibility. Not everywhere, but it's improved. I think wheelchair access, unlike in our country, the physically disabled have been the most successful in achieving accessibility because they have been promoting that the strongest, and they have got very strong leadership in the area of environmental access. So in South Africa, there is still the misconception that if we talk about accessibility, we're talking about ramps and accessible toilets. Blind access is least known. Blind access is the blind persons are actually the most feared. I was so fascinated to discover that in India, blind people are the ones that are employed the most. It's the other way around here. And blind persons seem to gain easier access to jobs. In South Africa, blind persons are the lowest on the run, next to people with mental disabilities. Wheelchair persons and mobility impaired persons have greater opportunity because for some reason corporates and employers believe that they can make their environments more easily accessible to a wheelchair person, yet they don't realize a blind person, all they need may be software. And so it's very different. So if you look at information accessibility, websites, there is growing awareness, but it's not equal to. So we're trying to influence web developers. I brought out again Saksham's trainers to South Africa to train 2 years ago, web developers and web designers, the retail banks to make their banking accessible. Some banks, their mobile apps are more accessible. So there's varying degrees of accessibility in terms of websites, in terms of mobile apps, in terms of environmental access, but certainly we're not anywhere near where we should be. And in terms of information, access to information, literature may not always be produced in a way that's accessible. So there's a lot of work to keep doing, but as I said, we're in a better place.
What are the key challenges before the South African blind and Indian blind, according to you now? If you have to tell us 5, if you have to name 5, what are the 5 biggest challenges still we have?
With blind. Okay, so with blind, for example, the first one is to reach all blind people, rural. Always the urban areas are more privileged, right? They have greater access to resources. We don't have enough organizations on the ground doing the work. So we got few, and they have a wide reach. And those organizations are not all well resourced, and they compete with each other for funding, and they've also become very political, and there can be a lot of in-house unhealthy political competition for resources and among the NGOs. So that has never been a positive thing. So that's one element. They actually shoot themselves in the foot by the way they carry on. At the same time, they are doing a lot of good. So to reach the rural areas, to find all the blind children that have just never had access to resources, to educate their parents, to just educate their communities. and to bring them to the centers where you can now begin to change their lives, to give them education. So one is education. We don't have enough schools. And in India, already blind children are mainstreamed. Not in South Africa. The law says to mainstream. But very few are actually out there, and those that are there don't have all the resources to support them in mainstream. The Indian model could work very well in South Africa. So the intention is to do that. So we need to provide more education from early infant stimulation right up to postgraduate. Although at the same time, I'm not saying it's zero. We've got a growing number of blind students at university, a growing number that are becoming professionals, and again, most of them get absorbed in government jobs. So employment is the next thing. So education, employment, accessibility. I'll tell you, recently I went on a road show around South Africa, and mobility is a huge issue. And I think India is similar there. There I didn't see much difference. Blind persons do more harm to themselves by not mastering the technique of the white cane. Yeah. The white cane for us is the same as a wheelchair for a physically disabled person. You go to America and all blind persons are truly independent and truly use their orientation and mobility skills. If you go and you can't walk with your white cane, they think you've got an issue, that there's something wrong with you, that you can't walk independently. So you got to very quickly learn to be independent when you're in the US, in the UK. But in India and in South Africa, people don't fully embrace the white cane. And instead, it's more like a token symbol that they carry around, or they may use it to some extent. But as soon as they have enough money, they employ a sighted person to guide them everywhere. And they then give up totally on their own independence. And then they choose to become subjugated to a sighted person. I did the same thing. When I was in a position, I also employed a sighted person. But now I do everything alone, and I travel everywhere alone, because I've become far more confident with my white cane. But that doesn't, so I feel that is an area that blind people, we don't understand our own access needs. We may understand it in terms of technology and accessing information, but in terms of truly living independently and having the confidence to step outside your door and go where you want to go. And how then do we expect sighted people to understand how we function? How do we expect the environment to be designed for blind people and for them to know truly what our needs are on the pavement, on buses, walking into a shopping mall? Blind access is very limited because we ourselves are not real advocates of blind access. We just switch to a human being. I don't know if you can... Yeah, if you can...
And in India, judiciary and political representation plays a huge role to get your laws implemented. So yes, you have already specified about your judiciary. What about political representation of disabled people in South Africa? In terms of political representation, it is legislated that 5% of parliament must be made up of persons with disabilities. So when we moved out of the apartheid system into a full democracy, we were the only country that had 5% representation in parliament. Now that still continues. And so we've got ministers with disabilities and so forth. And we've got them in quite senior capacities. So the Minister of Justice, for example, is a blind man. When we first also started with our democracy, when Nelson Mandela was president, and that we had what was called the Department on Disability, and that was directly reporting to the president, right? So it was based in the president's office, which meant that we had the highest status in government because we were directly there. And at that point, much of the laws were being developed and designed and changed. And when Zuma came into power, after Thabo Mbeki, so we had Mandela, we had Thabo Mbeki, and then came Zuma.
So when Jacob Zuma came into power, he changed the structure and he moved disability out of the president's office into the Department of Social Development, which upset the disability sector because they felt he went right back to a welfare model. Because if we are now being placed in social development, it means then that he now has reduced us to just a social welfare issue. So in saying that, it may appear that way, but that department is still made up of the same people, and it's led by a woman who's blind as well. And there are many disabled persons working in that department, and they have done a lot of good work. They have succeeded in ensuring that the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was adopted in South Africa. They ensured that South Africa went beyond just being a signatory, and we also signed the optional protocol. We have been busy for some time now with the exercise of what they call domesticating the convention, where every law in the country has to be amended and adjusted in line with the convention, and that has been happening. So each ministry, health, education, sports, has to adjust in line. So that department has been doing a lot of good work, even though they do come under criticism. And I mean, criticism is always good. Criticism is always something that helps you to improve.
5% representation.
Yes, in Parliament.
So is it also on paper or in practical?
In practice. That's in practice.
That's a great thing that we are lacking behind in that in India.
Yes, and it's across disabilities. So we got different to say. Some of them today would have, retired, but when they when there's vacancies or when they get elected, then preference is given to a disabled person. The disability sector would nominate, and the ruling government will appoint. So that's what happens. Yeah, that was a huge accomplishment. I don't think any other country has 5% representation.
Yeah, true. So how did you meet Madhu ma'am? And thank you, Madhu ma'am, for making making it possible to talk to you.
Yes. Well, that was a lovely story because we were hosting the World Blind Union in 2005, I think, in South Africa. 4. Yeah, way back. And so this big event was a huge accomplishment for the blindness sector in South Africa to be hosting the global blindness community. So that was being held in Cape Town. And Madhu and I was one of the key speakers at the event, but it was also a major opportunity to get to meet people from all around the world. And I was at one of the evenings when we were sitting at the dining table eating. Mother was sitting beside me, but I didn't know because blind persons seldom know who else is around them, right? Yeah. That's networking we need to make networking accessible. So in any case, she was right next to me, and then I heard her checking to see if the food was vegetarian. And that's when I realized, and then I asked her who she was, and she introduced herself and told me a little bit about her background, and immediately we bonded. And we remained friends ever since. And I was so fortunate that I was able to come to Mitra Jyoti and be here. And I have managed to come a few times now and be with her. Now we've become personal friends.
Great. So what would be your message to the listeners, to the young disabled activists, or to the mainstream people?
Well, my message to the mainstream, to persons with disabilities listening in all your different, where your radio reaches people in all different countries, is that the world is changing at a rapid pace, and that technology is what's creating the accessibility. And it's not going to be long before we're driving independently as blind persons and doing everything like everyone else, alongside everyone else. And in fact, it is accessibility that's bringing about innovations for everyone, not just blind persons. When they create an innovation to make something accessible for us, it enhances everyone's lives. And so I feel the future is extremely positive, and that we've got to embrace all the opportunities out there, and we've got to, we can't sit back and expect for things to land on our lap and become the word I'm looking for, adopt an attitude of entitlement, that because I have this condition and it's purely human rights, I'm entitled to all these benefits to make my world right for me. I feel rights-based approach has a place to play, but we got to prove that we can contribute equally, we can shape this world equally, and we can live and play equally alongside everyone else. And basically, that's my message, and that's my message to both people with and without disabilities, to people of diversity generally. So I just think it's so exciting. I wish I could
much, ma'am. And,
I wish I could relive my life again.
Sure, you will. So thank you so much for giving us time. And if I have missed anything, or if you want to say anything, you can convey your message, you can express your feelings, you can share your experience. Hopefully, I think we have covered a lot of issues.
I think you've done a wonderful job, and I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk. I apologize if I talked too much. I want to just say thank you, and I wish you all the best with your radio station. And I would like to promote it in South Africa. We have a local Indian community that speak Hindi. We have a growing South African Indian community that's learning to speak Hindi. And I think it would be wonderful if I promote the station as well as reach conversation. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. तो आज हमने शकीला मैम से बात की और आपने बहुत कुछ सीखा होगा. अपना फीडबैक हमें जरूर दीजिएगा. हमारी वेबसाइट www.radioudaan.com.
मेरा नाम रिया है. मैं मैंगलोर की रहने वाली हूँ. स्वतंत्र जीवन कौशल प्रशिक्षण में मैंने बास्केट, पेपर मैट, ऊनी चटाई जैसी कई चीजें बनाने की कला सीख ली है.
मित्र ज्योति, जो दृष्टिबाधितों को शिक्षण, प्रशिक्षण, स्वतंत्र जीवन, कौशल प्रशिक्षण एवं रोजगार के अवसर उपलब्ध कराती है.
मेरा नाम संयुक्ता है. मैं बैंगलोर की रहने वाली हूँ. मुझे पढ़ना बहुत पसंद है, लेकिन जब तक मित्र ज्योति के ब्रेल प्रेस से किताबों को पढ़ने का मौका नहीं मिला था, मेरे पास इस आनंद को पाने का कोई साधन नहीं था.
मित्र ज्योति, दृष्टिबाधितों का विश्वसनीय गैर सरकारी संस्थान.
मेरा नाम संजना है. मैं हुबली से एक नौकरी की तलाश में बेंगलुरु आई हूँ. यहाँ सुरक्षित आवाज मेरी जैसी महिला के लिए वरदान है.
आप मित्र ज्योति से संपर्क कर सकते हैं. हमारा फोन नंबर है 08022587623, 22587625. वेबसाइट www.mitrajyoti.org. ईमेल आईडी admin.office@mitrajyoti.org. धन्यवाद.
काश मेरे पास कोई ऐसा ब्रेल डिस्प्ले होता जिसे मैं अपने कंप्यूटर से भी कनेक्ट कर पाती, फोन से भी कनेक्ट कर पाती, आराम से अपने कॉलेज में नोट्स ले पाती और जब मन करता ई बुक्स भी ब्रेल में पढ़ पाती.
तो प्रॉब्लम क्या है? खरीद लो ना.
खरीद लूं? जानती भी हो ऐसा ब्रेल डिस्प्ले कितना महंगा आता है.
अरे तुम्हें नहीं पता, सक्षम अब हमारे लिए लेकर आया है इंडिया का पहला पोर्टेबल लाइट वेट ब्रेल डिस्प्ले ब्रेल मी, जिसमें मार्केट में मिलने वाले बाकी ब्रेल डिस्प्ले के फीचर्स तो है ही, साथ साथ ये उन सभी ब्रेल डिस्प्ले से 10 टाइम्स ज्यादा सस्ता है.
क्या बात कर रही हो? 10 टाइम्स ज्यादा सस्ता? पर क्या ये सिर्फ इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज को ही सपोर्ट करता है?
नहीं, सिर्फ इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज को नहीं. करंटली ये मराठी, हिंदी, गुजराती और मलयालम में भी अवेलेबल है और जल्दी ही इसमें बाकी के रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस को भी ऐड कर दिया जाएगा. और तुम्हें ये जानकर और भी खुशी होगी कि इसकी बैटरी कम से कम 12 से 15 घंटे आराम से चलती है.
वाओ, फिर तो ये ब्रेल डिस्प्ले मैं जल्दी खरीद लूंगी. इसे खरीदने के लिए हमें क्या करना होगा?
इसे खरीदने के लिए या फिर और जानकारी पाने के लिए आप कॉल कर सकते हैं 011-424-11015 पर, या फिर विजिट कर सकते हैं सक्षम की वेबसाइट जो कि है www.saksham.org.
मैं तो अभी कॉल करने जा रही हूँ और आप भी ले सकते हैं अपना पोर्टेबल ब्रेल डिस्प्ले ब्रेल मी।